A common theme we see among Batman, and by extension, DC villains, is grief. Whether it be grief of a loved one, or grief over losing the opportunity to live a better life than the crappy one they had, or just grief over a tragedy in general. It's part of what makes the rogues human. You understand what transpired to make them become violent, dangerous people. An interesting theme I've seen with a few DC villains is their need to live in a fantasy world to cope with their grief. They force their victims to play part in the fantasy, otherwise they will be met with punishment. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 DC, mostly Batman, villains that do just that. First in our list is Baby Doll, otherwise known as Mary Doll. Mary is a lady who was dealt a crappy hand. Her episode is famous due to the ending of Batman showing his more caring side and wanting to help someone who clearly isn't doing well, as well as the symbolism. As many fans have put it, the person who never got to be a kid comforts the person who never got to be an adult. Mary's grief comes from the fact that she will never be able to be anyone other than Baby Doll. No matter how hard she studies, she won't be taken seriously due to her condition. Due to that fact, her only recluse was to live out her old show. It was the one thing she was respected for. Everyone else had moved on, but she was still stuck in the same spot. Those connections she had with the characters were real, but unfortunately not the actors. As she states,
"It was real to me!"
The next villain we have up is Scarface and the Dummy, admittedly my favorite rogues. They're not too popular, but I feel like they're some of the saddest villains in Batman the Animated Series. Scarface is a mobster who carries around a puppet who resembles his old butler who passed away. We're introduced to them in Read My Lips, but we don't know much about their origins until the Season 4 episode Would You Please. Despite the two being among the lesser popular rogues, Would You Please is regarded as one of the best episodes due to Scarecrow not relying on his gas to pry at someone's fear, Batman's deep connection with Alfred, Scarface's origins, and the dark implication that Batman had to move and bury a dead body in a new area. It's an episode you can tell the team put a lot of love and effort in. Here we understand why Scarface, a conniving, tough gangster, is protective over the Wesker puppet, when he seems like the last guy to be like that. The Wesker puppet came from his old butler, the living Arnold. Arnold was the only adult that paid attention to Scarface when he was young. His family was emotionally neglectful and left him in the care of the servants. Arnold's hobby was ventriloquism. He taught Scarface how to throw his voice and put on puppet shows for him. Scarface had even recorded a few of them, which he seems to watch to remind himself of better days. Everything changed when Arnold was killed in a drive-by when Scarface was 10. Grief-stricken, Scarface clung onto one of Arnold's puppets and started having delusions that he was alive to cope with his loss. That the bullet only grazed Arnold and he managed to escape the cemetery. It was a delusion that became stronger as Scarface grew of age. His voice became better at mimicking Arnold's, which is probably another reason why he kept the old recordings, to study and master Arnold's voice. His fantasy is challenged when Scarecrow asks how Arnold is still alive despite him being old when Scarface was still a kid. Scarface argues that he hadn't known Arnold's age before and he just probably had a good diet. Scarecrow suggests that if he's so sure that Arnold was let out of the cemetery, he should see if the grave is still there just to be sure. This starts to crack at Scarface's psyche. He starts to notice how uncanny Arnold looks. He even compares him to the old recordings of Arnold. Eventually he has to be sure that Arnold is still alive and he rushes to the grave. One of the most interesting moments of the episode is the debate on whether Scarface should be allowed to find out that Arnold is actually dead and let his fantasy shatter. But ultimately, the Wesker puppet isn't just a delusion of Arnold being alive at this point. It's become another personality for Scarface. Without Wesker, Scarface is going to be the violent, dangerous man without an angel on his shoulder begging him to be good. Batman realizes this when he ponders what his life would have been like had he not had Alfred. We learn in this scene that Scarface and Arnold are parallel to Bruce and Alfred, and just how much the puppet means to Scarface, because ultimately, if he doesn't have Arnold, he doesn't have anybody. My favorite moment is the scene in the cemetery where Scarface confronts the Wesker puppet, threatening that if he's not actually Arnold, he's going to make him pay for deceiving him. There's a lot that goes on in that scene. Scarface doesn't take his hand out of the puppet when he slams it against the random gravestone. You can hear an audible crunch. Whether it be from the puppet or his hand is unclear. He bites his lip hard enough to bleed when he voices Arnold. We see in this scene his self-loathing while he's threatening Arnold, harming himself and talking down to his other personality. It's an unfortunate aspect of Scarface. The only other man Scarface hates just as much as the guy who shot Arnold is himself. One of the things I like about the scene is how when the rain falls on Scarface, a single tear comes out of his eye. It's hard to notice due to the fast rain, but it's one of those blink and you'll miss it moments. Now, Scarface is one of the few villains that's allowed to keep living in his fantasy, since Batman had to make Arnold's grave look like it was opened a long time ago, but it's disturbing to imagine what would have happened had his fantasy been broken. Third and final on our list is Ray Thompson. Ray is just one of the saddest characters ever. He was literally a kid that survived a nuclear fallout that killed his family, his heroes, and destroyed his town. He didn't even fantasize about being king or anything. He just wanted to be a goofy ward of a hero group. I'm upset as hell that the Justice Guild of America or whatever, or the Justice League for that matter, didn't even try to talk things out with him and just resorted to punching. Like, yeah, the dude was a dick for keeping the rest of the survival stuck in his Mabel land, but like, they could have handled the situation with more tact. Anyways, his episode was pretty sad since he got beat up by his heroes. My boy Ray deserved better.